are hosting open houses with cocktail bites.
Yeah.
Right here. So I want to introduce our next presenter, and I'm very excited to bring to you Blayne Bennett. Is it Bennett?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Blayne Bennett from Cocktail Bites. And as it says right here, craft cocktails in edible form. And thanks for having one that's orange and thematic for us.
Yes,
All right, great.
of course.
Blayne.
All right, thanks everyone. So I apologize. I just noticed I have some paint on me. We're painting our house, so it's everywhere. And I'm glad that you got to enjoy some edible cocktails this morning. Thanks for testing those out. So where did this start? This started when I was in college, and like many a young college student, I fell in love with Jell-O shots. This love continued beyond my college years, but my friends weren't quite as enthusiastic about them anymore as I was. So I had to innovate unless I wanted to continue eating Jell-O shots alone, which at that time I thought was a bad thing. Now I've matured and realized it's okay. So I decided I would class them up a little bit. First, this involved getting some fresh fruit in there, a little bit higher quality alcohol, but I still used Jell-O. And then as I started to learn more about the craft cocktail movement, I fell in love with these amazing drinks that are, made by true artists. And the drinks would go away too quickly. I wanted to be able to chew them. So that's where I started getting into what is now Cocktail Bites. So I make them with quality natural ingredients, local whenever possible. So I prefer to use local liquors and fruits because it's incredible the resources that Montana has right here where we can combine them and make something that is so delicious and sourced from basically our own backyards. Technically, sometimes it is from my own backyard. The strawberry mango mimosas have strawberries from my backyard garden. The Damiana Dare Me has rosemary from the little herb garden in front of my house, so very local. So aside from the ingredients that are in Cocktail Bites, I also wanted to focus on presentation to make it something that wasn't your standard scoop and slurp process that a Jell-O shot normally involves. So I tried to step up the game a little bit. This included some garnishes and a method of delivery that would be appropriate for whatever gathering they're at. So they can be served in little wrappers if that helps for like larger gatherings where you might be getting them from a stranger or something like that. And then for smaller parties, I just put them on nice platters. And it's been some fun experimenting. So I have even done a Bloody Mary cocktail bite. It was interesting for the brave, but very good when served with a piece of a nice salami or cheese. So that's where I'm at with Cocktail Bites now. I'm focused on kind of a proof of concept in Montana. So I guess a question you might have is how would you sell these? You might ask, but Blayne, isn't the process of obtaining a liquor license in Montana arduous and extremely expensive and the entire system should probably be overhauled? To which I would say, yes, of course, that is very true. So in the meantime, I am partnering with local liquor establishments so I can piggyback off of their existing liquor licenses. This also gives me access to an existing client base, which is very important for a startup. So my first partner is the Silver Slipper, which is out on your way to Lolo. And conveniently, my sister is one of the managers there, so I had a little bit of an in. But they are selling them for $4 a piece in the bar, and then giving them away at their tailgates for Grizz football games. So homecoming was a big weekend for me. Made over 500 during that week, so that was crazy and awesome. And it gave me a little glimmer of potential of this being a profitable business. So that was very exciting. Other things I'm doing, I am partnering with Montana craft distilleries to take some of their most popular cocktails and put them in edible form. And again, this is another way for me to piggyback on an existing client base, kind of use a product that's pretty much already been validated in the market. People have already shown that they appreciate these flavor combinations and that it has name recognition, so that helps me out a lot. And so then next up is just going to be explosive growth. So I plan to make hundreds of millions of dollars and be all over the US. So that's basically my plan. But more seriously, I'm focused on the local proof of concept so that I can understand how the market wants to use cocktail bites. Is it something that will do better in bars or upscale restaurants, or is it something that is positioned better for home entertainers or maybe for event planners who will do catering for large events? So I'm trying to focus right now on listening and learning how people use them, how they like them, and go from there. So that's all I have for you, but if you have questions, I would love to answer them.
We do have questions.
I guess I'm curious about the kind of the licensing piece, and because obviously you can buy chocolates that have a little bit of liquor in them. You can buy, there are other foods that have liquor in them. So are there rules around that? What does this actually qualify as? Is it food? Is it beverage?
Yeah, that is a really good question. And when I'm ready to pony up the money for the lawyer fees, that's one I want to look into. And I have gotten some really good feedback that I should try and position it as much as possible as a food item, just because that would make it a little bit easier for me. So that's absolutely a direction I'm considering going. Kind of a funny side note regarding legal issues. I got a message several months ago on Facebook from a girl that said she held the international patent for all alcohol confectionery products, and if I did not stop selling cocktail bites, then she was going to send a cease and desist. So the folks at Dorsey Whitney were really helpful and just kind of gave me a little bit of sidebar advice. One of which was that I should respond saying that I actually had the intergalactic patent, so that superseded her international. But she said global patent, and so it was kind of like, well, there's not really a global patent. That's not really a thing that exists. So responded just with, after doing an initial search, I'm unable to find any patent that's attributed to your company. So I consider this issue closed. I haven't heard from her since, so hopefully that's all good, but there's no way that she could have, control over all Jell-O shots, and I think there'd be a lot of fraternities and sororities that would disagree.
Good. I'd like to hear about what your initial thoughts are on scalability. You jokingly said you make hundreds of millions of dollars, but this seems like the type of business that could fit very simply into a franchise model, because I don't know what the startup cost would be or inventory or things like that, but I could easily see this being at events and things all over the country. Yeah, no, that's an idea that I love, and actually I think is probably the most realistic as far as scaling the company, just because what it really comes down to is the recipes and the process. And I have a little bit of potential to innovate on packaging for delivery, but that would really be the only thing I could have as intellectual property. So franchising is an ideal kind of situation just because then I can work on maintaining the quality and consistency across different areas, but also let each individual franchise focus on their own local flavors. So I think this is something that would do very well in Washington, where they also have a really amazing craft spirit movement. And, and then obviously when you get into places like, Sun Valley, Idaho, or, places in California or New York or something, your price point can change. So the Montana price point for alcoholic beverages is much lower than it would be in other places. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for higher margins in other locations. Yeah, for sure. Question.
No, go ahead. Well, just let me first say they're just fabulous. Not only fabulous tasting, but your presentation is really superb.
Oh, thanks.
So my question is similar to Paul's. You have your alcohol content in that, but I'm assuming that the size of the bite doesn't necessarily equate to what a shot would be, or is there a shot that has that?
No, don't worry about that. No.
Okay.
So it depends, since I do have varying alcohol by volume percentages, it's a little bit of a different equation per flavor. But for the most part, eating 4 or 5 would be equivalent to a standard drink, whether that's a glass of wine or a cocktail, if that helps.
Mm-hmm. And I just think that you would do this is my opinion, that you'd probably do really well in some high-end restaurants, because I know a lot of people really want something like that. They'd like an after-dinner drink or a dessert or both, but they're pretty full by the end of a meal. So something like that is just, I could see someone like Scotty's Table really loving that. And
Cool.
Also, I think for, I don't know if you've done any outreach to any of the caterers in town, because I just think that it would be fantastic for them to just piggyback onto their thing.
Just briefly, yeah, I mean, just the thought on that is probably talking to Charlie Beaton at Big Dipper, because that's, I mean, where he gets most of his money is putting ice cream into the restaurants and the grocery
Yeah.
stores. Plus, obviously, they occasionally put alcohol in their ice cream as well.
Sure.
So, I wonder how they've solved that issue.
Oh, sure. Thank you.
Yeah, and I was gonna kind of second what Bryony and Paul are both saying, but I do have some event planning contacts that I'd be happy to connect you with. But the other thing that I was thinking I have a couple friends who are caterers in town, and then a couple folks in Portland who would love this, and they do parties for like the Portlandia crew. You know, like I'm just picturing these like as such a hit, being a past like. I don't know, past with hors d'oeuvres, or I love the idea of a restaurant after drink or after dinner kind of toddy,
Yeah.
which would be awesome. So anyway, I think catering though would eat it
Okay.
up, and something that they wouldn't have to do, like they just pass and you could provide it, you know.
Perfect. Thank you. This is exactly the kind of feedback I'm hoping for. And if the Portlandia crew wants them, I have a Montgomery cocktail called the Rosie Finch, so we can put a bird on it. And
Yeah, I love that. The other question I just wanted to ask, kind of along what we had asked earlier, was how do you do you see your do you see a storefront in different states? Do you see how do you see that scaling that way? Do you see more people, you have little individual people doing cocktail bites around? And how would it be, would things be stored in a facility? You would have molds and things that are refrigerated and ready to go? I'm curious.
No, I love it. And those are all phenomenal questions. And I think that's what I'm really trying to make sure I'm smart about testing in Montana. So for the storefront versus, just individual person that kind of floats around, what I'm looking to understand is what kind of following I can get here organically, so I can better understand if Cocktail Bites will get enough name recognition on its own to justify having a storefront where people would go to that, or if it is going to be a model where we will continually try and piggyback off of existing brands that are developed in those markets. So I love the idea of a little storefront, and I think it could be viable even in Montana with a manufacturer's license, which is much cheaper than an all beverage license. And manufacturers are limited by bottle sales by volume. So you would have to buy a lot of Cocktail Bites for it to be, equal to the 2.5 bottles or whatever it is that you can buy from manufacturer. So I think it's possible. I'd like to test that definitely here, even though it would be harder than, say, it would be in Phoenix, Arizona, where their liquor laws are a little bit easier to navigate, because I just believe that I want to take the hard route, kind of like the Montana guy was talking about, go above board to start. And then that way, if I can be profitable and have a consistent revenue stream that way, that's where I can then innovate to get better margins and just continue to increase bottom line.
I just wonder on the store thing whether rather than your own store, more the kind of store-in-store concept. So, I mean, this seems like brand-wise it would just fit perfectly with something like Market on Front. And they've got they've got the refrigeration counters where they're doing the salads and meats and stuff.
That'd be perfect.
Yeah.
That would be great.
Yeah. I can introduce you to Ben if you don't know him already.
Okay, please do.
Hello, Ben.
I was thinking too about airport lounges, especially for the airlines and people flying first class. That would be a real coup to, go down the road for
Whoa.
people who just want to do something like that.
So you don't have to pay United $8.
Well, I wasn't.
And it takes
no.
takes about 20 minutes to digest.
I,
So
w-
it'd be
I
like
wasn't.
getting
I
your
wasn't
drink
thinking
on the
about
plane.
United. More like Delta and other upscale airlines.
I know that's a great idea, and what I found with the bars that have served them, the Silver Slipper, the Badlander, and the Iron Horse being all of bars that have sold them, the bartenders seem to really like them because they have something that is not a replacement for a drink. It's an additional purchase that they basically don't have to do any work for, and they get tipped on it. So bartenders like it, which is good. And I think that was a scary initial hurdle for me to get over because I didn't want to be, forcing people to try and push these, and then they were going to have 300 left over in the fridge and not know what to do with. But at every place, they've sold out immediately. So that's been good response.
Good. Yeah, I looked at your Facebook page, and initially when we were talking about this, I kind of thought of cocktail bites like a Jello shot, like the orange and yellow ones.
Sure.
But then I looked at the photographs, and you've got some beautiful and really elaborate thematic things that you could do. And I went, wow, you've got the 4th of July and the St. Patrick's Day. You can go wild with that. Is that your artisticness coming out, or you have somebody else that helps with that?
No, that's where I kind of get to play with some things. I get to use the creative side of the brain for that. And what's funny is, I'm not a photographer by any means. I've just found that when you get in really close on something, it looks really artistic and wonderful. So that's been my secret and how I've gotten away with just using, iPhone camera to do this so far. But I think the catering route could be really fun just because then we could explore some fun thematic things as far as layout, other kind of table design things to make it look like a really beautiful presentation.
Yeah. It seems like it might be a fit. We talk about catering. A lot of caterers all over the country, they've already got their clientele. They're already doing upscale things that utilize this as either a franchise model or a licensing fee. You license it and the recipes, and they can use it, but you get paid. And there are a lot of people like that. Next question.
Couple questions. This Sid mentioned your social media. This looks to me like something that Pinterest would just love. Do you have a Pinterest account for Cocktail Bites, and how is that going?
So Pinterest, I am an avid Pinterest user. I love it. I do not have a Pinterest account for Cocktail Bites yet, and actually I would love your guys' feedback on this. The reason being is right now my recipes are kind of that's my gold, and so I want to hold that and keep that. I don't know for sure how Pinterest would respond to strictly photo without an accompanying recipe. And that is based on my Pinterest use experience. I mean, when I go and I look at something, I look at it because I want to make it or do it or have it. So that's why I've held off. But I agree, I think have the medium of Pinterest would be great because it's photo-centric, which would be good.
Have you thought about Instagram?
I do use Instagram. So you can find me on Instagram at cocktail_bites. And that's been going well. I've done Facebook and Instagram solely through organic growth. And again, kind of hearkening back to I want to go high road on this and make sure I'm comfortable with my product, how I'm putting it out, what people are responding to before I invest the money to go, to grow a fan base on Facebook or something like that, sticking to my own budget.
I think some of this is sort of a branding question. You talked about sort of franchising and kind of really your own intellectual property as the recipes. So I think there's generally a sort of branding question that may be worth talking to some of the kind of marketing firms in town and getting their ideas on how you really build a brand around this.
Yeah.
The other thing could be, I mean, not so much Pinterest, but actually thinking about YouTube, building partly you as the brand, as the cocktail bites kind of maven, showing people how to make them themselves. And if you can really kind of build that business, you can build the empire that is the videos and the books and the things that go with it, as well as the actual product itself.
Sure. And I think, so where I have been attracted still to the idea of even releasing recipes and stuff is that when it comes down to it, it's kind of hard if you don't know what you're doing, and they can kind of easily not turn out very well. I mean, if I could tell you about all of the batches that I had to either throw away or just eat alone because they didn't turn out. So, you know, I do think that there's some possibility for both. And you know, there are people who are still going to say, even if it's something they could make themselves, it's just easier to buy it.
No, I totally agree. I think it's
So, okay, cool, thank you.
I'd have to second those thoughts with, you know, maybe you want to brew beer at home and then you say, well, it was okay, but I'm still going to go to the brewery and have a real one.
Sure.
Or, but with your Pinterest idea, maybe you have a few recipes that you put out there to whet their appetite and get them interested in doing it, and that helps spread the word.
Yeah.
But then there's the licensing or whatever your business model ends up being, which for the higher end ones or the really tough ones to make, those aren't free. There's maybe a freemium sort of model where you have to pay to upgrade to get the recipes and the tips and tricks on doing the real ones. So those are some ideas too.
Yeah, I just was looking at a guy on Pinterest and right, I go, oh, I want to make this. Well, he goes, okay, you can sign up for one of my classes. So then you could go and sign up and take a class on how to make this little rock house thing. But so that was sort of an idea as well. We could teach you. You can come to Missoula and we'll have a cocktail bites class
Oh, that could
if
be
you
fun.
want the secrets.
This is recorded, so I can get all these notes, right?
And then I was also curious, like let's say you were getting married and wanted to serve these to your guests, and you were going to have 120 guests who you think each are going to eat 2 to 3 cocktail bites. So you're looking at making, 300 plus cocktail bites. What is the time needed to make that? And if you were to be doing like that all summer for every wedding in Missoula, what kind of labor would be required to do that?
So that's another area where scalability would really need to be thought out. So right now, depending on the different type and how big the order is, I can crank them out pretty quick. So my biggest cost on an individual basis is labor, not materials, which labor per bite, kind of the margin for that is going to go down the more I make, because it doesn't take me that much longer to make 200 versus 20. So for how I would do it now, it would be a lot of sticky floors in my kitchen, and a lot of help from my mom and friends. So I think there are definitely some things that I would like to explore for mechanisms to help make that faster. So for the layered ones, instead of having to manually measure out how much needs to go, I use silicone molds. So how much needs to go in each individual mold, and then let that set for a given amount of time, come back and measure again. It'd be nice to have a mechanism that would fill multiple molds at the same time. Does that answer it, or should I go more detail? Okay.
That's great. So that's the time we have for Q&A. So we got to ask you what we can do. I think it was almost a brainstorming session. But
It totally was.
yeah, what can we do specifically to help you as 1 Million Cups to move this forward? This is a great idea.
You know, the feedback is the biggest thing I need right now. What I'm able to pick up from the bartenders, from people that have enjoyed them, doesn't go much deeper than, wow, those are so delicious, kind of thing. So a little bit deeper on the feedback would be really meaningful to me, exactly like what you guys were providing today, of like where you see it. Because I want to make sure that I stay in line with where customers envision getting the product instead of trying to force a different path that I think would be better. So I appreciate that we've already gotten that, but I guess please get in touch if you have more ideas or if you're available to dig deeper into them.
Great. Thank you very much, Blayne.
Thank you so much.
I was saying when you talked about bartenders, like if there's some left over, of course there were none left over, but I couldn't imagine a bartender go, we got all these left over, what are we going to do with them? Be like,
Right.
I know what we're going to do with them. We got this.
Yeah.
This is great.
All right, thanks. Oh, so shelf life, good question. I have a lot of things working in my favor. Alcohol is a preservative, gelatin is a preservative. Most of them use some form of citrus, which is also a preservative. The biggest question is if the alcohol is evaporating out and at what speed. So it'd be no danger of, even if I've kept them for a week and they're fine. It's just they might not have the same alcohol content.
Okay. That's a wrap for this week, 1 Million Cups. Like Patrick said, bring a friend. We'll see you next week.
Thanks.